Welcome back to Skytech-Lens. A new formidable barrier has emerged on the land routes connecting the U.S. to Alaska. Not a wall, but a bureaucratic maze of tolls, inspections, and the threat of denied passage. For decades, the journey through British Columbia and the Yukon was routine. Now, it's a costly, uncertain gauntlet, fundamentally altering the economic geography of the continent. American truckers face steep tolls, intensified inspections, and unpredictable delays, turning a once predictable route into a high-stakes gamble. The Alaska Highway, built as a symbol of U.S. Canada cooperation, is now a choke point, with American transit treated as a privilege to be taxed and regulated. The impact is immediate. Commerce slows, costs rise, and Alaska's vital supply line is threatened. While most cargo reaches Alaska by sea, land routes are essential for time-sensitive and high-value shipments, fresh produce, construction materials, and oil industry equipment. The new Canadian rules risk isolating Alaska, making its economy more vulnerable than ever. This isn't just a logistical headache, it's an economic and political crisis in the making. The Great Northern Squeeze has begun, and its effects are rippling far beyond the highways of Western Canada. Canada's new transit policies have thrown American truckers and businesses into chaos. What was once a straightforward border crossing is now a gauntlet of fees and exhaustive inspections, with trucks delayed for hours or days. These delays mean lost revenue, spoiled goods, and broken contracts, especially for perishable shipments to Alaskan supermarkets. Businesses are scrambling for alternatives, but shifting to maritime routes is slower, costlier, and not always feasible. The increased costs are passed down the supply chain, threatening higher prices for Alaskans, and delays for construction and oil projects. The once reliable Alaska Highway has become a source of anxiety, chilling investment, and forcing companies to reconsider their presence in the state. Beyond economics, the new rules have bred resentment and a sense of betrayal among American truckers and business owners. Many see the Canadian measures as a politically motivated attack, not legitimate regulation. The goodwill that once defined the border is eroding, replaced by suspicion and animosity. The fallout is both economic and deeply personal. From Ottawa's perspective, these restrictions are a calculated response to renewed U.S. tariff threats, not unprovoked aggression. Canada frames the Alaska route measures as both retaliation and responsible governance, citing safety, environmental concerns, and the strain of increased traffic. Officials argue that American access was always a courtesy, not a permanent right, and that Canada has the sovereign authority to regulate its own territory. The message, when relations sour, privileges can be withdrawn. Canada also emphasizes its duty to consult Indigenous communities along the highway, adding legal and constitutional weight to its position. Any future arrangements, they argue, must respect Canadian law and Indigenous rights, considerations absent when the highway was first built. The era of unquestioned American access is over. Canada is asserting its sovereignty, and the U.S. must now negotiate, not assume. Canada's response is unified, with provinces and Ottawa coordinating a multi-front pushback. British Columbia led with new tolls on Alaska-bound trucks and boycotts of American products, while Yukon restricted U.S. businesses from government contracts and discussed further symbolic bans. Ontario joined by imposing a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S., expanding the dispute beyond the West. These actions show Canada's willingness to spread economic pain across sectors and regions, signaling to Washington that the fallout won't be limited to Alaska. The alignment of federal and provincial governments is rare, reflecting a shared belief that a firm response to U.S. trade pressure is necessary. By layering tariffs, tolls, and boycotts, Canada has created a complex challenge for the U.S., requiring negotiation with a coalition of determined premiers. The message is clear: Canada will not be pressured by a single level of American government. The White House now faces a united Canadian front. President Trump's reaction was swift and incendiary, framing Canada's measures as a direct attack on U.S. sovereignty. His rhetoric escalated the dispute, turning a trade disagreement into a national security crisis and energizing his political base. Personal attacks on Prime Minister Trudeau poisoned the diplomatic well, making productive negotiations nearly impossible. Conservative media amplified the narrative of a Canadian blockade, pressuring lawmakers to adopt a confrontational stance. Nuanced discussion about the origins of the dispute vanished, replaced by calls for retaliation. The crisis unfolded as Trump visited Alaska for a summit with Putin, adding complexity and urgency. The State Department was stretched thin, managing a diplomatic firestorm with an ally while preparing for talks with an adversary. What began as a trade spat now threatened to spiral into a full-blown national security showdown. For Alaskans, this dispute is a direct threat to daily life and economic stability. The state's dependence on reliable supply chains means any disruption quickly leads to anxiety over shortages and rising prices. Small businesses face tough choices: absorb higher shipping costs or pass them to customers, risking their survival. The Alaska Trucking Association warns of looming crises, delays, shortages, and project disruptions. Political leaders urge calm and call for a diplomatic solution, caught between White House rhetoric and the need for cooperation with Canada. Ordinary Alaskans feel like pawns in a political game, watching decades of cross-border friendship erode. The dispute threatens not just commerce, but the social fabric of the last frontier. The question on everyone's mind: when will Washington and Ottawa remember the people caught in the middle? At the heart of the dispute is a legal clash over American access to the Alaska Highway. The U.S. claims a customary right of transit, rooted in the 1942 Alaska Highway Agreement and decades of seamless passage. Canada counters that the agreement was a temporary wartime measure, not a permanent guarantee, and that it retains full sovereign authority over its territory. The absence of a modern treaty leaves the issue open to interpretation and political will. Canada also cites its constitutional duty to consult Indigenous peoples, arguing that any new agreement must reflect contemporary legal and environmental standards. The U.S. sees new Canadian conditions as obstacles, not legitimate legal requirements. Without a clear legal framework, both sides construct plausible arguments, fueling the standoff. Resolving the dispute may require a new, formal agreement for the 21st century. Behind the public drama, diplomats from both countries are quietly negotiating, seeking to separate supply chain stability from political posturing. Both sides know the North American economy can't withstand a prolonged conflict. A resolution will require concessions. The U.S. may need to respect Canadian sovereignty and offer trade assurances. Canada may need to separate legitimate concerns from punitive measures. A new transit agreement could guarantee American access under clear, predictable rules while respecting Canadian law. The stakes are high. Alaska faces shortages and economic pain. Canada risks damaging its most important trading relationship. The crisis threatens to fracture a century-old partnership and destabilize the continent. This is a test of leadership. Can both sides look beyond short-term politics to reaffirm shared values and strategic partnership? The diplomatic tightrope is narrow, and the consequences of failure are severe. The future of U.S.-Canada relations may depend on finding balance before the rift becomes permanent. Thanks for watching a video and subscribe the channel now for more updates. Thanks.